Okay. So what we did in the last 2 weeks is a foundation that is set up for what are APIs and how APIs can be used. Um, so we started with in the week one, what would an API in terms of definition, where it is used, what are the different benefits and use cases where APIs help. We also looked into how a API would look like. So we talked about a client and API specification and API implementation and all of that, right? So maybe what I can do is that I can quickly show these slides of what we did right earlier so that we can. So this is what we went through, right? So we talked about what are APIs and how an API would be like consumer, and then the green box is the API and API implementation and the service, on top of which the API basically is allowing us to access the capabilities of the service. And the blue box is the specification, right? And then we talked about different types of APIs, local APIs, network APIs, remote APIs, web APIs, and how the APIs were evolving over time. And we talked about the importance of APIs and the different types of APIs in terms of north, south, and east, west. Then we talked about the API lifecycle, right? So I'll pause on this slide for a moment because whatever we do in today will basically go into the details of this. So when we develop an API, the first thing is to coding an API is fairly simple as you saw it in the week two, right? So in week two, what we did, we used Express and Node to create a sample API, and it is fairly straightforward and simple, right? Now what we will do today is more focus on the aspects of how do we then let this API used by the consumers, right? Like say if they have to use this API, what all the various things that we need to do in order to make the consumers use the API in a simple and secure way. So this whole process, if you see, starting from 7, 8. So in this diagram, if you see it in the API lifecycle diagram, starting from 7, 8, 9 and 10 and 11, 12, all of that, right? So what we will focus is on the 7 and 8 today in terms of how do we secure the APIs, how do we manage the APIs, post the design and implementation of the APIs. So that's what we will do today, okay? So if we and then we also talked about in various aspects of how do we consume an API and how do we develop an API and so on and so forth, right? So this is all you have seen. So now we are in week three. So in week three, let me go to week three slides. Okay, so this is week three slides. So if you have to see the APIs as an end-to-end thing, right? We saw the life cycle diagram. So when we have to actually use them in real world, right? There are a lot of other things are needed. For example, if somebody wants to see our APIs and they want to see the documentation, there has to be a mechanism for them to understand what is the specification of the API, etc. That's where API specification comes. But to host the API specification, you need a portal. That is what is called API portal, right? This is the API portal. If you see in this diagram, right? On the right top, you can see. And similarly, to secure the APIs, to monetize the APIs, you want to do various aspects to the API at runtime, monitoring and securing all of that. That is where API management platform come. And as part of the API management platform, one of the key components is what we call API gateway. So what we will today do is we will learn API gateway, how to use an API gateway. We will start with how do we install an API gateway, and then how do we set up an API using API gateway, and how do we use an API gateway. So this is basically all of it is in 45 minutes. So it would be very, very useful for you when you have to take the APIs and then use them in real world, right? So basically this is what we will focus on today. Okay. So what is an API gateway really does, right? In this diagram, if you see, we talked about API gateway. What does it actually do? So when we develop an API, the API itself, doing certain things. Like in the last week, we looked at an inventory API, which is giving positions of an SKU, right? So that is the functionality of the API. But how do we ensure that the API is not used by wrong people, right? Only the rightful authorized, authenticated people only can use that API. So that is where security comes. And how do we ensure the API is not being abused? Abused as in like people calling the API like every like millions of times a particular in a second, right? So you cannot possibly have that kind of a capacity when you host an API. So there's a concept called rate limiting. Similarly, these APIs will connect to some backend, right? So how do we then ensure routing, appropriate routing of this API to the corresponding service in the backend? Caching, right? If the API has certain data, you don't want to hit the backend every time, so you want to cache the data in the API. Offline capability. What if the backend is down or some service is down? So can API still function without the backend? So these are some of the sample capabilities an API gateway gives, but there's a lot more to this, right? So what API gateway can do, but just a glimpse of what API gateway can do. Now, what we will do today, we will go through a product called Kong. Kong is an open source API gateway. It is one of the most popular open source API gateways that is out there. Apart from that, there is another one called Tyke, and then you can also use proxies like Nginx, etc. also as API gateways. But Kong and Tyke are basically designed. WSO2 is another one. So Kong, Tyke, WSO2, these are the three major open source API gateways that are out there. IBM also has something called IBM API Connect. It is partly API gateway and partly API framework. That is another open source API gateway. But we will use Kong for this session. But you are free to explore other API gateways as you see them relevant, for you to learn, right? So what is Kong? Kong is, as I said, it is an API gateway. It is something what they call it as a cloud native API gateway, in the sense that it can be easily installed and set up on cloud. And then it can be used within Kubernetes and Docker and containerized environments. Okay, so that is what is Kong. And as you can see in the screen, I have put a link. If you want to, you can go explore that link later. But Kong is the platform that we will use it for today. And if you see in the Kong logo, anybody can identify what is this logo stands for? That's basically King Kong Godzilla, right? You would have seen those movies. So that is the King Kong, right? The big, that is where the Kong name comes from, right? So that's why they put the logo also like that. So let me see if there are any questions or anything in the chat. Okay, I don't see anything in the questions. Where do I see the chat? Chat window, King Kong. Okay, somebody answered it. Good. All right. So now let's go to the, I'll give a bit of overview of Kong Gateway, how it would look like, right? So if you remember the diagram that earlier we showed, this diagram, right? This diagram, right? So this is a view of how an API would look like, the API specification, the API itself, implementation of it, and the service, right? So it is a more or less similar diagram if you see it, right? So this is the API consumer, API client on the side, and on the right hand side, what you see is the services, okay? And in between is the API implementation and the API gateway. So API gateway is the place where you implement security, rate limiting, all of that we talked about earlier in the previous slide. So Kong Gateway, what it does is that it basically has all of this. So what we will do today is that we will basically implement all of this using Kong Gateway, right? So we will start with the creating a consumer route. First, we will install Kong gateway, and then we will do consumer route and service, and then we will connect to the backend API, and then we will basically test the whole thing. So a lot of things that we will do. So so brace yourself, and we will be doing a lot of control C, control V, a lot of cut and paste. So just ensure that your fingers are ready, warmed up, and check your keyboard if it is ready as well. Okay. So what is next we will do? We will then go get into action now, right? So what I will do, I will paste this link in your in the chat window. So maybe in the Q&A, not in Q&A, chat window, I'll paste it so that you can actually go to, what I did is that I put all the instructions in this GitHub page so that you can just open it in the browser. I'll also open it so you can see the instructions. We will go step by step, right, to all these instructions. Okay, so first thing we will do is that we will do the same thing that we did the last week, right? So we will go to Google Cloud. So go to cloud.google.com. You all have created the accounts in the week 1 and week 2, right? So let us go there and click on console. Okay. Now, once you are in the console, this is how the console would look like. And once you are in the console, click on this thing called activate Cloud Shell, right? Or you can directly type in the command that last week we mentioned, right? Other option is one ssh.cloud.google.com. Let me paste this link also so that it is easy for you. Yeah. So I pasted the link. You can click on that link and you will end up in the Google Cloud Shell Editor like this. You can see my screen. I will increase the font size so that you can see it clearly. Okay. So is it visible in this? The screen is visible to everyone? Like font is visible because we will be going through all these instructions. And I'll be typing and you can also type along with me. Okay. So the very first step we will do is that we will basically install Kong, right? So this is what we will do. We will so the three steps there are. First one, we will install the Kong API gateway. Second thing we will do is we'll set up the API, and third thing we will secure and protect the API. So we will do three steps. Okay, let's start with the first step. So how do we install Kong gateway? So the link that I shared, the github.com/Arvind Azu and Kong API gateway, you click on that link and you will end up in my GitHub repository and you will see the instructions, right? So the very first command you see, what we are doing here is we are actually using Kong's Docker image. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Docker, but you don't need to really worry about it. Docker is actually a mechanism to install and run software on any Linux machine or a Windows machine without worrying about all the software dependencies and all of that, right? So it's a very, very popular mechanism to run modern software. So we also call it cloud native software, right? So explore Docker when you have chance. It is worth learning. It is a very, very useful tool and something that you can use it wherever you think you need to develop something production grade software. So what we will do, we will first take this command. The very first command, what it is doing is it is downloading the Docker image from the repository, Docker repository. So where is my, okay, Cloud Shell. Let me put it into a different window so that it is easy for me to handle it. Okay. Okay. So what I am doing now, I'm taking the very first one, and you can just go into the root of the Cloud Shell and type it, right? Or paste it, Control C, Control V. Now you will see that, at the Docker pull, actually what it is doing, it is downloading the image for Kong Enterprise Edition. Okay, it is now downloaded. Once you see the new prompt, again go back to the screen and let us see if it is downloaded or not. So if I click on, if I type Docker images, I'll see that in the repository I have one image here, right? So, and then you see there is an image ID. Copy that image ID. If you double click on it, it gets copied into the clipboard. Now what you do is that you rename that image as Kong E, because that ID is very difficult to remember. So for all our discussion, we will actually use sorry, we will basically use this ID and we will alias it. Alias is basically, we'll rename it into something that is easy to use, right? We will put it as Kong E. Okay, so now if you see again Docker images, you will see that, sorry, images, you will see that, Kong E is listed here. You can see that. Okay, so same image ID, we kind of aliased it. So now we can refer the same with this name instead of this long name. Okay, now the next step is we will create a Docker network. So what we will do, we will basically create two images. One is the Kong itself, and second one is a Postgre database which we require for storing the data. So, and then they need to be network. That's why we're creating a network. So this network is called Kong EENet, and we will be using that. So network is basically, we call it an overlay network. It is basically between these two images to talk to each other. We need some networking setup. So the second step you see, as you see here, is to, so I'm hoping everybody has done so far, right? So we ran 4 commands so far. First command is we did a Docker pull. Second, we checked Docker images, whether the Docker image is downloaded. Third is we aliased it as Kong EE. So now we can refer the newly created Docker image as Kong EE. Third thing that we did is that we created a new network called Kong EE net. Everybody followed so far? So if anything, raise your hand or ask it in Q&A. Yeah. Okay. Now what we'll do next, what we will do is we will basically, so as I said, Kong gateway requires requires a database which is PostgreSQL. So we'll install the database also using Docker. Okay, so this is also fairly straightforward. So you just take the first command in the second section, set up and run PostgreSQL. So if you type that and then press enter, so what it is doing is it is actually pulling the PostgreSQL's image from Docker repository, and it is installing it for you. So it's already installed, right? So it is now there. Now if you see Docker images, you will see one more image here. Okay, so you can see Postgre as one more image. Okay. Now what we will do, we will run this command and set up the data that is required for Kong in PostgreSQL. So it is basically a set of instructions. So normally when you type this command, the Docker is still running, so it will take time. So give few seconds and then enter. So it created the database that is required for Kong in Postgre. So what we have done now, so we have done now two things. One, we first got the Docker pull Kong gateway and we checked, we aliased it, we created a network, we downloaded PostgreSQL image and we are running the Postgre server, as well as we set up the necessary data that is required, schema that is required for Kong EE, right? So, and then we connected them together using the Kong EE network. So now all of them are set up now, right? Now what we're going to do is now we are going to run the gateway itself. Now that we have set up the Kong as well as the Postgre, we will now run the API gateway. Okay, so that is basically number 3 in the instructions that you have. Okay, so you just paste that and then enter. Now what happened? Now now you can actually check whether it is running or not. So it would have started it. So it starts at localhost 8001 because that is the uh, port that we have used. So now you can see in 8001, I did a curl. Curl is a command line HTTP client. You basically use curl to send a HTTP request. You will basically get this, right? So if you want to experiment with curl, you can experiment. You can see curl, like for example, HTTP google.com, right? So you will get a response from Google, right? So like that. So you basically use any URL, and then you can say. So now what we have done here with the curl, we hit the local host and we're trying to see what all the services that are deployed in Kong. And response, you would see null, nothing. There's nothing yet because it's clean slate so far, right? So then what we'll do next is that we will actually create an API, right? So for this, what we will do is that we will use something called mockbin.org. Mockbin.org is a service from Kong again. It is actually meant for creating dummy APIs. Like if you want to test some APIs, you can just create a dummy API. So we will use a basic API. So it doesn't matter what API it is. So in the diagram that we showed earlier, basically if I show back, so we are basically setting up this part. So mockbin actually access this part, the last part in this diagram, this part, right? What you can see here. So since we are not actually developing the API, we will just use a dummy API here. What we are interested in this particular session is more about how do we secure an API, how do you protect an API, right? So that's what we will do. So now we will go back to the Cloud Shell, and I'm basically trying to create what we call a service. So if you come back to the screen, so if you see in this gateway architecture, there is a service and there is a route and there is a consumer. We are going to create all these three today. The first step is creating a service. So this command is basically what it is doing is now we are sending a request to um, this is basically we are using admin API of Kong API gateway to create a service. Okay. And this service is pointing to mockbin.org, right? That's what we are doing. That is the first step. So it is, you would see a message like this, right? Where it says that, host is this and the protocol is HTTP and these are the various attributes of the service. Okay. So all of you probably would have seen it now. Now, once that is done, again, go to the next step, which is basically creating the route. We created the service. Next step is to create the route. So let us create the route here. So again, I'm typing. It is again going to the admin API of the Kong API gateway. And then we are creating the routes here. And the route is basically a URL. We are giving a URL called mock, and we are giving the name of the route as mocking. So again, it creates, if you enter it, you will see, mock is created, and you will see that it is basically gives a successful response, right? So you can see HTTP 201 created. Okay, so I hope all of you followed till here. So what we did just now, we basically we have set up the Kong API gateway, we installed the API gateway, we ran it, and now we have created a service which is a mock service on top of mockbin, and we created a route on top of the service that we just created. Now what we will do, we will try to test the original API, which is from mockbin.org. Basically, this is the actual API that we are testing. So what mockbin.org API, it is basically, it's a dummy API, as I said. It is giving you some sample response if you see it here. Okay, if you type that command, the bottom command in this here, there are two commands is here. So this is the original API, and this is the route that we created on top of it using Kong. So we can also test that. So if you see the response that came from the after I typed the command. So this is what I did: curl -i -x get mockbin.org request. So what we got a response which basically showed that this API is basically being served from mockbin.org and so on and so forth, right? So you can see that the API is being served from there. Now let us test the route that we created. Okay, what did we create? We created this route, right? So that is, we created mock slash mock is what we created. So let us try that, what it should show. Okay, this is the previous one. So now let me type this command and you'll see the same response almost, right? So you can see I type now HTTP localhost 8000. Almost everything is same except that the URL here is localhost/request. And earlier the URL was, if you see in it, it is mockbin.org/request. So what's happening here is that if you go back to this diagram, so you can, the API client can directly talk to this, right? That is where the mockbin.org here. Now what we are doing is, okay, this diagram actually gives a more clear picture. As you can see it in this diagram. Um, Okay, so what we did, we created a route called mock and we created a service called mock service, and there is a backend which is the mockbin.org, right? Now this API client can access this mockbin API directly. That's what we did in the earlier command. This is what we did. So we typed, here if you see it, we typed curl mockbin.org/request. That's what we did. We directly tried to reach the mockbin.org. So that is what this particular one. Now second thing what we have done is that we created this route and service. Now we try to access this route. That's where we tried curl and HTTP localhost and mock/request. This is what we tried. And as you can see, the results both are same, because in one case it is directly going here and second case it is going through this, but no matter what, it basically finally hits this particular API. So that's why you see the same response. Okay, so everyone is clear so far. There are a lot of things that are there. Okay, so there are many ports because Kong uses a variety of things, including admin ports and other components. So all those ports are basically meant for those use for those things. I think Danish has already responded. Okay. So we are good with this so far, right? I hope everybody is able to follow till here. Okay. Now what we will do, now we have to really, now there is no use, because so far what we have done is we basically routed the same API through the Kong API gateway. Now, then you might ask, then what is the point of API gateway? Because we can directly access the original API, right? Um, so that is where the next set of comes. So Deepika asked a question, what is the use of Kong? Yeah, that's exactly I'm trying to explain. So what we have done earlier, Deepika, uh, so what is an API gateway does is that it basically gives all these capabilities. Like what it does, it basically helps you with security. So basically the original API might not have all these capabilities: security, rate limiting, routing, caching, all of that, right? So what Kong API does is that, so this is the original API, this box on the right hand side. So Kong API gateway sits in front of it like a gateway, right? Gateway is a word, English word. If you see it, what it does is basically every request that goes to the original API goes through the API gateway first. So since every request passes through this gateway, we can do a lot of interesting things. Suppose you want to block the incoming request, like if the API client is calling this API and we want to block it for whatever the reason, or we want to provide some security, we want to provide some caching, we want to uh, add some more additional capability to that API. All of that we can do because everything has to pass through this, so we can fiddle with the incoming request and outgoing response. So that is what API gateways do. API gateways basically enhance the original API in terms of capabilities like security, capabilities like rate limiting, caching, all of that, right? So there are a lot of capabilities you can do, but today what we will do, we will look at only authentication and rate limiting. Okay. So to do that, what did we do? We set up the API in Kong as a route and a service, and we are moving to the next section. Okay. So this is where we are. Okay. So now let's go to the, so this we answered already. Okay. So next, go to next part, which is we'll secure the API. Okay, because otherwise there's no point in using API gateway if you're not really using any API gateway capabilities. So we will start with security. Security is a very important part of APIs, because any API that you put on the internet, you have to ensure that the right people are using it, right? You don't want that to be used by somebody whom you don't want them to use. So that is where security comes. And there are a variety of ways in which you can implement security. Today, what we will do is that we will do a key-based authentication. Basically, you have to pass a key in order to use the API. Okay, so that's what we will do. So to do that, what we will do, we will first take the mock root that we created. And Kong has a concept called plugins, right? So everything in Kong is a plugin. So to use security in Kong, you have to basically enable the a security plugin in Kong. So that's what this particular command does. What this command is doing, it is sending, a request to Kong admin API to enable key auth plugin. Okay, so let's go there, go back to our this thing, and I'm typing this command. So it basically now enable the security for Kong. Okay. Now, if I go to the same mock API that we created, let us see what will happen, right? Okay, so you can see here what it says. It says, in no API key found in the request. So earlier it worked fine. Now it is not working anymore. The reason is that we enable the security on top of the API, right? The key-based security. Now it expecting that there has to be a key in the request. See, you see now the use of the API gateway. It basically helping you to understand, or rather it helping you to protect the API with a key, right? So that is how you basically use the API gateway. Now what we have to do, we have to now give a key, right? So then how do we do that? Let us do that. Next step, that is the next step. So what we will do, once the key based authentication is set up, we have to do what is called consumer, create a consumer, right? If you see in this diagram, so we have created a service, we have created a route, we have to now create a consumer to enable this key, and then we have to define the key, what key to use for the security. Is like a password, key is like a password, right? So a key is, in this case, it's a number. So what we will do, first we will take the this particular command number 2 in the securing API section, and let us type that. So here you can see that the command is passed, and you can see that it is created a consumer. Okay. Now the next step that we will do is that we will set up the key. So the key, you can see in this command, the key will be ACM decan. It is like a password, right? So this is our command. So I'm typing the next one. You can see that it created the key. Now basically we have set up the key for this particular API. So now when we call this API, we have to give this key, which is ACM decan. Okay. So what we are going to do now here, we are taking the curl command again. We are again calling the mock API. And now what we are doing here, if you see in this command, I hope you can see this screen and font is enough. So as you can see here, we are talking again, copying curl, and we are passing this key as part of the header. Okay, this is -h is for passing a HTTP header. Okay, so we are going to do that, and let us see what happens. See, we were able to go through the same, we now are able to access it, right? So earlier we missed that, right? When we tried that earlier, we got a message saying key is required, right? So it said no API key found in the request. Now we are able to successfully access it. Everybody got this so far? So what we did just now, we have taken a API, and which is from mockbin. Then we created a service in Kong API gateway. We created a route, right? And we were able to access it, the same service, mockbin service, through Kong. Then we implemented security on top of it, right? So security helped us to protect the API, and unless somebody has this key, which is the ACM, they cannot access the API anymore, right? So that's what happened here. Everybody clear? Let me see if any questions. Yeah, the recording will be shared. Okay, Deepika is asking. Deepika, recording will be shared in YouTube. Go to ACM Deccan channel in YouTube. You will see the recordings of week 1, week 2, and week 3 also will be there very soon. What we will do next, now that security is done, we will go to the next one, which is called rate limiting. What is rate limiting as a concept, right? So for example, you have a API, and this API can handle, say, 10 requests or 100 requests. You have limited resources, right? And no API can handle millions of requests at the same time, because there is a certain capacity requirement that is there, as well as there is certain there will be also economical impact, right? Like you cannot have like 100 servers running just because somebody is going to call this API a million times, right? So there are practical aspects on why you want to limit number of requests. So what rate limiting does is it limits the number of requests, especially in the internet, if you know, right? There is this class of attacks called DDoS, distributed denial of service, right? So what does that mean is that people try to bring down the servers by sending a lot of requests simultaneously. Okay, so when they do that, the DOS attacks basically bring down the entire server infrastructure. It is a very common way to, protest. It is a common way to hack, right? So you would have seen in the news that Pakistani hackers try to DDoS Indian websites, and then they try to bring down the government servers and things like that. It's very common. Chinese do that all the time. Russians do. I mean, even probably Indians do. We don't know. We do for other countries maybe, but we don't hear it here. But it's very common that the cyber wars, right? Like earlier it used to be physical wars. Now it is cyber wars. So people do it all the time. Okay, one country versus the other. And then this is one part of it. This is the international between nations, and then there are also bad actors, right? Like there are hackers who tries to bring your servers. They basically, you would have heard of class of attacks called ransomware, right? Like they'll try to they'll say that we are going to attack your servers if you don't pay us x number of bitcoin by tomorrow, right? Something like that. So that is very common. So if you don't have your API is protected by rate limiting, what will happen? All the requests will start coming into your actual backend services, right? So for example, you have a Postgre database or SQL Server database, or you have a mainframe, whatever the backend you have, right? So the APIs are built on top of it, right? So now if your API gateway is not there and you directly expose your API and people can do DDoS, and then whole thing can come down. So this is where the API gateways help. Okay. Now, what we will do, we will enable this API gateways rate limiting plugin. Okay, so again, we will go back. Uh, so this is a request for that. So what is this? If you see it doing, it is actually config.minute 5. Basically, what it is doing, it is limiting number of requests per minute to 5 at the maximum. Okay, so you cannot call the API for more than 5 times in a minute. Okay, that's what it is doing. So once you type the command, you will see that you will get a success message and limited all that. Now what we can do, we can test this API, right? It's fairly simple. Okay, so again I'm using the same curl command. Oh, so did you see this? What did the response came? No API key found in the request. Why did that came? Because we said we enabled already security for this API, right? So we need to pass the header also, otherwise it will not go. So I kept this so that all of you know that we have to pass it. Okay. Okay, now it is accessible, right? So now I pass the security header, the key, basically API key for this mock request again. Now I will to get this is the first time I called. Now let us call it second time. Second time also I got the response. I'm calling it third time. I got it again. I'm calling it fourth time. I got it again. I'm calling it fifth time. I got it again. And I'm calling it a sixth time. Oops. Okay, so it is not working. Let's see what's happening. Plugin is enabled. Curl localhost. Did there get any error? Yeah, it is already enabled. Okay. Then now we are calling the. Okay, this is the API. This thing failed because of the API key is not there. I am again entering the API key. Oh, this is interesting. So it is not working for some reason. As usual when we do these demos things. See this finally it came. It says API rate limit exceeded, right? So basically it now crossed the number of requests per minute. 3, 4, 5, 6. Now it is said API rate limit exceeded. Okay, so basically after 6 times in a minute, it is basically now saying that API rate limit has exceeded, so it cannot be called. Now if you try after some time, it will again work because that limit would have reset, because more than a minute, then it will reset. Okay, so
Arvind, just to add, the sometimes it will not work because the actual API itself might be down, the marking API,
right,
when
right.
you are having that issue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's possible. So, so what we did just now, so we did, we have basically set up an API. We have, so let's go through one by one, right? What all things that we did so that we revise. We installed the Kong API gateway. We set up the Postgre database, and then we ran the Kong server, and then we tested it. Then we set up a mockbin. We used mockbin, and then we created a service for mockbin. We created a route for mockbin so that we can now basically Kong API gateway will be the front end, or rather the gateway through which all the requests to mockbin will go. So we created a route, and then after that, what we did, we secured that API using the key-based authentication mechanism. And then finally what we did, we rate limited. Okay, so this is all what we did, right? So now so client will not get the key. Normally what happens, so this is a question, in order to access the API, how could a client get the API key from server? Normally what happens when you work with the API provider, right? The API provider will give you the key, right? So it could be, there could be an online portal typically where you basically request a key, you will get a key, whatever that key that we have set up, that basically will be delivered. So there is normally another component in this whole process called, in the earlier slide I showed, right? This component called API developer, right? App developer and API portal. This API portal is through which you basically request for a key, and then you will get a key as a developer, and then you use the key to then call the API. Okay, so that's the uh, way in which you do. Okay. So now, okay. So we basically set it up and rate limited, and we tested it also. Okay. So so any other questions? So we have basically covered the entire ground as far as APIs is concerned, right? So between these 3 weeks, we started with what is API to. We went into how do you design the API through API specification. We have implemented API, we have consumed APIs, and then we have also used the Kong API gateway to demonstrate and implement the security and rate limiting, right? Now you have basically have the all the foundation required for you to develop the APIs, right? So now you can build on this. I would recommend that you go through Kong. Kong is a wonderful product. It is open source, free to use, and they also have an enterprise version, but you don't need to use enterprise version, right? So you can always use the community edition, open source edition. Okay, it's fairly easy to understand and use. I hope a bit whatever we have learned, you will be able to build on top of it. So if any other questions, we can actually wrap early today, right? And I'll give back the time to you. And one more thing, we have to get the uh, attendance as well, right? So I'll float the feedback link. Give me a second. So any other questions in the meantime? How did you find? Anybody has any comments, feedback? Please do pass it on. Danesh, you want to add anything? Wrap the last week and this week. You want to say anything?
No, I hope we are able to now understand the use of a specification and the difference between an implementation, a consumer, and specification. I think if we are able to do that, then we can actually say that we have learned or got the objectives completed.
Hmm.
That is all, Arvind.
So give me a second while I find the link to the uh, feedback form. So any other question in the meantime? Where is the feedback link? I lost the feedback link. Anyone has the feedback link which we posted last week? So Deepika Kong is confusing. Yeah, it will be confusing because you are looking at it for the first time. But if you spend like 2-3 hours on it, it is fairly easy to follow. Okay, don't get disappointed in the first go, because every software has some learning curve, right? So it's not like the moment you say it, you will learn it. Not able to find the link for this. Mm. Nash, do you have the link by any chance? Last week, what we posted?
So let me check.
Uh, 1 second. Let me find it. So while I find the link, I also want to tell a few things about the API gateway landscape, right? And what is the market like? What we talk today is mostly on the API gateway from an open source perspective. But when you have to work in real world, there is a lot of other things, including commercial tools also are there, right? So it is beyond just the open source tools. So there are API gateways from companies like Amazon, Google, Microsoft. All of that basically comes in into when we have to work with API gateways in the real world, right? When you're working with a bank, or when you're working with a telecommunications company, etc., right? All of them will have um, uh, the commercial tools will be used, right? So one of the things that you need to do is to learn those as well, and understand at least what all those various different API management tools and API gateways. So to give a view, one, all the cloud guys like Google has something called APZ. Okay, that is a API management platform that Google offers to clients. Basically, you can go to Google and then buy this and then use it. Similarly, Microsoft has Azure API Gateway. Okay, and also AWS has something called AWS API Gateway. So there are varieties of such tools that are there, which you will have to uh, you will have to know how to use and when to use, etc. So Kong is just a starting point, right? So you can use Kong, and you can get the uh, various aspects into learning. Basically, since it's open source, it is free to use. You can basically use like how we did it in this session. And as you learn Kong, you can then go into the next set of actions, as in how do we then build on top of it, right? What is that we can do to make the I mean, in the real world. I mean, also, if you see it, we only talked about two capabilities. We talked about rate limiting. We talked about key-based authentication. There is a lot more to what you can do with API gateways. In Kong itself, Kong has many plugins, right? So you can enable these plugins and then find varieties of things on top of that. Okay. Mm. Okay, let me find this feedback URL. Where is this? One second. Okay, so I found the link. I'm just pasting it. Please. Oh, okay. Vinita already pasted it. Okay, let me. I pasted it again, but I think already it's there. So you see that link. You can. Uh, Okay, I have a few questions to answer as well. What is the role of Postgres database? So Postgres database is basically the data store that Kong uses internally, right? It needs to store, like for example, we set up a route, we set up a service, we set up a consumer. So it needs to store all the state in some database so that you will not lose it when the system goes down, right? So that is where Postgres database is used. How to build an API gateway like Kong? That is actually very involved. It's an engineering activity, because we have to create a new API gateway. So two things you need to know. One, you need to understand how do you intercept network requests, right? Essentially, API gateway sits in front of actual API, right, behind the scenes. Now that is the first step. First step is basically you have to design a proxy, right? So proxy is something takes the request and then sends the request to forwards the request to the service that is behind. So that is first thing that we have to do. So you need to understand the networking, and you need to understand how that will work. The second thing is that once we have that, then there has to be some mechanism where we will be able to bring in capabilities like security, rate limiting, and so on and so forth. So there has to be a framework that we have to design. So if you have used, maybe any of you have used servlets or technologies like that, all of those technologies have something called filters, right? So essentially an API gateway acts like a filter, right? So it basically intercepts the request and then passes the request to the back and then comes back. So if you want to build as a sample, simple API gateway, you can actually do, what you can do is that you can use a servlet filter, and then you can implement that as a sample. It cannot be used in the real world, but to understand how API gateways work, that would be a good mechanism. You can use a servlet filter, and then the servlet filter will then intercept every single request. And then what you have to do is that in the servlet that you would create, and that servlet will have to use a HTTP client to call the actual API. right? So it would basically, you implement a servlet with a servlet filter, and these filters can be designed as in you can have a rate limiting filter, and you can have security filter, etc., etc. And then within the servlet, what it does, every request that comes, it would forwards that request to back to another API in the backend, right? So to do that, you have to use HTTP client, and then you have to basically build a proxy. So you have to basically have a proxy servlet and a set of filters. So that is how you would implement. But building a real production ready API gateway would be a lot more engineering driven, and it has to be very performant, because it should not add any overhead to the actual API, right? So at the end of the day, whatever we do should not, like say actual API takes, say 20 milliseconds to respond, and we put these plugins in front of it and proxy out of the gateway in front of it. The gateway cannot take another 50 milliseconds, right? Then it is basically finally primarily it doesn't address the purpose, right? It actually kills the purpose of the API gateway itself. It is adding so much overhead that people cannot use it anymore. So normally you would use a commercial or open source proven API gateways, but you can build your own as an experiment, as a project, if you want to get familiar with it. Can we make two APIs to communicate with each other is one question. Yes, I mean, of course, right? So in that case, one API will act as a client to another API, right? Like if you seen our consumer in the diagram that we had API consumer, right? Like say API client or API consumer. So this API client can be another API itself, right? So that is not a problem at all. So it can be done. Okay. So if you don't have any further questions, then we are done for today, and we are wrapping it up early. But I hope all of you got some value from the 3 day or 3 week workshop. This is a format that we are trying from ACM Deccan, and ACM Dakhan, the committee, including Dr. Naresh and Professor Tilottama and all of them, Kishore, Krishna Kishore, all of them have been very, very helpful in doing this. And Danesh, especially, I want to thank him to come forward. Danesh is my colleague in Wipro, and he's one of the best API experts in the country, maybe in the world also. So he volunteered to come and speak to all of us. So I'm really thankful to him. And we will do more. The ACM Deccan wants to do a lot more. So spread the word, make your friends join, whether they're in your colleagues in office, or whether they're, your friends in college, make them join. These will be very useful to you. And then next time when we do it, please do encourage your friends to join as well. Okay. No problem. I think somebody was saying they couldn't join the first half hour. That's fine. The recording will be there. So you can go through the recording. It is fairly easy to follow. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Danish. Thanks, Dr.
Thank
Naresh.
you. Thank you. Thanks.